We affirm our sole contention is a new frontier battle. Ruddazil finds in 2018 that in lieu of more traditional approaches to terror, the Trump administration has authorized the DoD and Cybercom to use offensive operations against global terrorist organizations, which has proved crucial in reducing terrorism worldwide. OCOs are crucial to finishing the fight against terror in two major arenas, the first being the Middle East. As Hubbard of the New York Times finds last month that due to the US pulling troops out of Syria and the Middle East, it spells the perfect storm for the resurgence to ISIS, as there is now a power vacuum in the region that could possibly destroy the stability in the Middle East. But that would be devastating, as Carlile finds that unless the United States continues its efforts to stop ISIS, the next resurgence would be more lethal than ever before. But fortunately, OCOs have been extremely successful at solving for terrorism, thus preventing said resurgence. But US OCOs are critical to fighting terror in the Middle East for four reasons. The first is sharpshooting, as Ackerman 19 explains that current drones are so imprecise that for every one terrorist targeted, 28 civilians are killed in the process. Fortunately, Bramlett finds in 2019 that cyber drones backed by OCOs are 85% more accurate because their algorithms are able to detect real-time locations of terrorists. Thus, Solimer finds that OCOs and drones would significantly reduce civilian casualties, and that's extremely critical, as Shaw finds that for every 10 civilians killed by a drone strike, it creates one militant for a terrorist group organization, since civilian casualties radicalize the population and build up hatred against the US. But second is cutting off funding, as Kalamaki 19 explains that ISIS has diversified its portfolio to the point where traditional operations such as airstrikes are not sufficient to take out funding. Critically, Temple finds this year that because ISIS changed the way that it operates, the US has already begun to use cyber operations in response to terrorist financing, and it's proved successful. That's extremely important, as Sales 19 finds that it isn't just enough to stop gunmen on the ground. The only complete way to take them out is through their financial assets. But third is compromising recruitment. Because of the low cost and convenience of cyber warfare, Bieta finds that terrorists are shifting online for recruitment, funding, and attack planning. Empirics further prove, as Bashar finds in 2019, that in Bangladesh alone, the hotspot for ISIS recruitment, where they get 3/4 of their militants, 82% of those militants were recruited online. And Bates 17 explains that offensive cyber operations are used to bring down media platforms that are critical to recruiting, and it's the reason why international recruitment for ISIS has collapsed entirely. That's historically proven, as Vavra finds that in 2017, the US cyber-attacked ISIS and crushed the recruitment capacity. It took them years to rebuild. But fourth is challenging capabilities, as Vavra finds that same US cyber attack in 2017 that halted recruitment efforts also damaged ISIS's conventional capabilities. She continues that the US uses OCOs to push ISIS out of their command posts and into our allied troops' reaches. Overall, because of the US OCO campaigns, Rogers 18 explains that ISIS lost 98% of its territory once controlled due to the help of US OCOs, but they were specifically key to US campaigns, as Lamoth concludes that cyber strikes against ISIS culminated in the destruction of the adversary on an epic scale, and that the military can only achieve effects like this with the force including cyber weapons. There's two impacts to stopping terror in the Middle East. The first is preventing power grids attacks on the United States, as Charlton finds that ISIS has been attempting to recruit expert hackers to infiltrate our Western networks, which Dauphin finds would inevitably materialize as an attack on the vulnerable US power grids, and that'd be devastating, as Pry 15 finds that such an attack has the potential to cause a year-long nationwide blackout that could kill over 100 million people from starvation and cause total societal collapse. But second is reducing deaths caused by ISIS, as Dudley finds that in 2018, in 1 year alone, terror groups killed almost 20,000 people, but realize that doesn't account for deaths by instability. For example, the Syrian civil war that was exacerbated solely by ISIS killed 500,000 people total. But the subpoint B is Africa, as Aladenusi explains that this year alone, Boko Haram, the terrorist organization in Nigeria, has become an even larger threat, as they've shifted to the cyberspace, gaining the ability to use seriously damaging cyber attacks, and there's been a 60% increase in said attacks. They conclude that these attacks will climax in cascading economic catastrophes for the Nigerian economy. But thankfully, Ogulana finds in 2019 that the US has aided Nigeria in deploying OCOs through A, tech transfers, B, information sharing, and C, training, and it concludes that OCO deployment in Africa by the US is what will uniquely help African nations and give the need to combat terrorist organizations in the long run. That's key, as Boko Haram has severely destabilized Africa, as Call quantifies that Boko Haram has put 5.2 million people at risk of death by threatening their food supply and plummeting the famine. Thus we affirm.
Alright, that's good. Alright.
You good?
Alright. Do you care if I sit or stand? Alright. I'm far too tired, but.
Yeah.
Alright. Nihor and I negate. Our sole contention is preventing chaos in cyberspace. Subpoint A is destroying cyber alliances. Valeradio 19 finds that Trump granted the military the initiative to launch OCOs with little interagency consultation, which represents a dramatic shift from past restraint. Smeets 19 finds that U.S. Cyber Command has undergone a significant shift in its strategic thinking, away from deterrence toward persistent engagement, where they want to cause friction globally, continuously, and seamlessly. And the U.S. is the only NATO state that makes causing conflict in our allies' networks a necessary and explicit part of our strategy. However, these OCOs degrade the trust and confidence of our allies. As Smeets continues, the U.S. Cyber Command operators wiped ISIS propaganda material off a server in Germany, but did not ask the German government for consent, which caused significant frustration and revealed an uneasy situation with cyber cooperation, that there is no agreement on when military cyber organizations can access systems and networks in allied territory to disrupt our adversaries, and he concludes that this may end up causing significant loss in our allies' trust and confidence. Dunlap Hall finds that this carries real-world consequences that are not in the U.S.'s cyber interests. An effective response to cyber threats requires the cooperation of international allies, but a damn-the-law approach would harm our relations with the law-abiding nations whose cooperation we must have to address cyber threats. This destroys alliance cohesion, which is key to effectively defend against catastrophic cyber attacks. David and Sarah, 17, finds that since bad actors in cyberspace can accomplish their goals from thousands of miles away, the U.S. must engage with its allies to craft solutions, and we need U.S. leadership to secure cyberspace. In fact, we need to cooperate with EU allies like Germany and Asian allies like South Korea to create a unified defense. As She-18 elaborates that these cyber alliances are critical because it allows us to share intelligence and cooperate in incident response, gaining rapid access to information we otherwise won't have, and address newly discovered vulnerability, which dramatically improves the efficiency and effectiveness of our responses to these attacks. Subpoint B is stopping the cyber plague. Using OCOs causes the uncontrollable spread of computer viruses. As Min 17 of the Wall Street Journal finds, that cyber weapons are like biological weapons. They often spread beyond their original targets, and once they're stolen or used, their DNA or their underlying code can be endlessly repurposed. This leads to cyber weapon proliferation. As Hitchens 19 finds that to copy a cyber weapon, all you have to do is see it, because the weapon itself is made of information. This makes copycat cyber weapons extremely hard to stop, because the code has to be executed on the target's computer in order to affect it, which means that the information the weapon is made of has to be seen at some point when it goes through the enemy systems. In fact, our cyber weapons are stolen and used all over the world. The ICRC in 2019 finds that our cyber tools are used by other actors who reverse engineer and reuse them for their own purposes. This lets our enemies gain easy access to them, which Lawson 19 finds risk unintended proliferation of our cyber capabilities to criminals and other nation states, damaging our ability to protect against cyber attacks. In fact, this proliferation has already happened, as Giant 2019 finds that the Chinese group APT3 reverse engineered the NSA's exploits and used it to launch attacks against Belgium, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. These two subpoints share two impacts. The first impact is preventing attacks on financial infrastructure. Sherman 18 of the Harvard Business Review finds that an attack on interbank networks would represent a direct hit on the financial services system, and such attack could cause a chain reaction as ATM networks and banking systems fail across entire nations, which is why they conclude that cybercrime costs nations more than $1 trillion each year and is the single biggest threat facing the business world today. These attacks would collapse the global economy. As Kemp of the Atlantic Council finds, the complex interconnections between financial institutions can cause a cascading catastrophe, where failure in one part of the market can lead to a global recession, bringing everything crashing down. Because this results in a devastating recession, the IMF finds that 900 million people could fall into poverty around the world. The second impact is protecting developing nations from cybercrime. Developing nations' ICT, or information and communications technology infrastructures, are particularly vulnerable to criminal cyber attacks. As Lazarus of the UN finds, these attacks can put their entire ICT development process at considerable risk, including mobile communications and the internet, because of their key importance in economic growth. This causes their economic growth to collapse. As Todd 15 finds, that internet connectivity is key to lifting 160 million people out of extreme poverty and save 2.5 million lives. Thus, we need it.
Can I see, like, internet is vulnerable to cyber attacks, and like...
Do you want the full card or just cut this far?
Can I just see, like, the internet impact scenario?
Yeah, just the cut card's fine.
Yeah, the cut card is fine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If you want to just like find the full card, just like click the hyperlink.
Sure.
Here. These chairs are so much more comfortable. I didn't cross here.
Yeah.
It's control click if we're trying to
Oh,
find
we're just
the
gonna
whole
pause while we pull up the...
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
control click. There you go.
Oh, okay. Okay, you good? Wait, where's the original?
Hey, that's our block file. You can't look at that.
I'm
I'm joking, I'm joking. What do you need?
Wait, I'm trying to find the original file.
The original, like, for
Like
the
the-
second card or the first one?
So So where you just showed us like cards.
Oh, the first word
card
file.
file.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
You have like 50 tabs open. I have none.
Well, look, I just haven't got around to closing them. It's like, yeah, man. Alright.
I got it.
Alright.
Yeah, there's just one more card I wanted to see.
Sure.
Can I see? Sorry, it's the one. It's the Haitians 19.
What does it say?
It's like all you have to do is see it to copy it.
Oh yeah, sure. I like that part.
Nice rhetoric.
You should read it, like in case. Yeah, here it is.
Sure. Okay. One last thing. Can I see IMF? It says like adverse shocks cause 900 million people.
You definitely have that card.
Is that just like the generic one?
It's the same
Yeah.
recession IMF card.
Okay, okay, that's fine.
If you
I
wanna
want
see-
to see
okay,
it.
cool, cool, cool. Yeah, we have it.
Okay. We just gotta double check.
Yeah.
What do you think
Like,
it
I
is?
just wanna see it, I just wanna see it, bro. IMF.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we got you.
Some kid pulled a quickie on us one of the other rounds, so.
They just didn't have the card.
No, they like read like a different IMF card.
Yeah, we probably stole this card from you or something, like off the wiki.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. I promise, we're not doing any weird shit here. Sorry. Hanson, bleep that out. Alright, I'm ready whenever you are.
Alright. Alright. So let's go to like the internal link on developing countries for
Yeah,
your
go for it.
second convention or second subpoint. Your JI card says that like say the ATP group, Chinese hackers, attack like Belgium, the Philippines, and like somewhere else. Why would they attack like the developing countries? Like what's to gain from like launching a cyber attack on
Oh
them?
yeah, so our impact's not just limited to nations. Well, two different things, right? Either it's nation states like China that are doing the attacking, or cyber criminals.
Yeah, but
sometimes China just wants to gain power over developing nations. That's why they'd hack them.
Have we ever seen
But also,
that
yeah,
happen?
definitely.
Where?
I mean, like the Philippines can be considered developing to some
But
degree.
like Philippines doesn't have like 150 million people in like extreme poverty.
I don't know how many people the Philippines have in extreme poverty. That's not the point. The other part is like cyber
That's your
criminals.
impact.
Cyber criminals can also gain access to these weapons through the same reverse engineering argument. They have obviously an incentive to develop
Okay.
to attack developing nations.
How often do we attack cyber criminals?
How do we attack
Yeah, so
cyber
like,
criminals?
so your link is that like they're reverse engineered because computer see, computer do. Like we see the code, we take it.
Yeah, it's like monkeys.
Yeah, so like, yeah, so why would we attack like random rogue cyber criminals in like the middle of North Africa or something?
No. Once our cyber viruses get on the internet, anyone can see and copy them. That's how they get access. And
Can I search up an OCO and just like copy it off the internet? Like,
Yes,
like
because
what
it travels through like
what?
other-
I can just go and get Stuxnet off like the internet.
Oh, you definitely can. I can download it for you. Wait, like if you give me 20 seconds, I can go find the file off GitHub or something. It probably exists, right? Because it ended up spreading to different nations. For example, Stuxnet specifically, we don't actually talk about Stuxnet in our case, but Stuxnet did spread to a whole bunch of nations, including Pakistan, and over 100,000 computers
Yeah,
around
it
the world.
spread to a lot
That
of
spread
computers.
so
but
widely.
this is a really
Wait.
It
Let me
spread to
finish.
a lot
Right?
of computers.
It spread
but was-
so wide. Well, let me
yeah.
finish this. Right? It spread so widely into so many countries, over 100,000 computers, that when it passes through these network protocols, it leaves traces that can be later reversed engineered
Sure,
to create
but
these
the reason why that
viruses.
doesn't matter is because Stuxnet was engineered to only target Siemens logic controllers. So while it existed, like its presence was on multiple computers, it only works and causes harm to certain computer types with certain computer chips.
Well, sure, but we don't even talk about Stuxnet in our case. We
Sure.
give examples more like the AP3,
Well, that just goes to prove a
group,
larger
or
point,
WannaCry,
but,
like
like-
other viruses. Like
Sure.
everyone knows about WannaCry and like your files have been encrypted and hacked thing.
Yeah,
You know what that is?
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want
So
a
what's the
question?
deal? All right, let me ask a question.
I don't
How
want to
much
like
time
show
do
our
we have?
hand.
My timer died.
We have 40 seconds.
40 seconds. All right, cool. So you, on this Boko Haram thing at the very, actually no, on this recruitment thing, you say that recruitment is able to stop like ISIS from recruiting online, right?
Yeah.
And then you also read this card that says 82% of ISIS recruitment right now is happening online. So
No. So the Bates evidence
How
is
does this
from
result?
2017. It's like saying that like in Bangladesh, they used to recruit like 82% of their militants online, but because of a cyber attack that we did on that area, their international recruitment collapsed entirely.
Right, do you have cards that say we did a cyber attack on Bangladesh?
Well, like we have the cards that say like we collapsed their international recruitment efforts entirely. It took them years to rebuild.
Is it top? It took them years to rebuild, so they've rebuilt it?
Yeah, and then we said just cyber attack again. We just do it over and over. The case is just like we don't take away cyber attacks because then like they'd come back.
Okay, cool.
Alright.
Yeah.
Alright, just gonna run for now.
Alright, that's all.
So that's 119 used total.
Yeah, so the order's going to be a Wang overview and then straight down the case.
Which case do I flow the Wang overview?
Wang overview's on top of our case. It's functionally framing for why terrorism comes first.
Is it the same
Yeah.
4-part thing that they read last round against
Yeah.
us?
But
That's fine.
I'm
Alright,
only
good to
reading.
know.
I'm only reading probability
We
scope.
did another straight team last round.
Yeah. So we're only reading the probability, scope, and severity ones. We cut
I can't
out.
remember the last one. Just read it. It's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Alright. Also, if I go too fast, can you say slow
Yeah, and where do you want me to flow that thing?
on our case?
Your district.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to go too fast, but
Same for me.
Here.
Yeah. Later on.
but
Alright, we're good.
and you guys too, if you can't understand.
Yeah.
Start on the Wang overview. You always prefer terrorism impacts for 3 reasons. First is probability. Deterrence theory checks back on the probability of all of their impacts. However, terrorists are irrational and cannot be checked back for. There's a 100% chance that we save lives, especially since our evidence indicates that OCOs have already been empirically and historically successful in stopping terrorism and saving lives. But second on scope, more terrorism and more regional instability affects the entire Middle East plus Africa, which pulls in other actors who feel the need to combat terror too. That happened in the Iraq War. That also links into their cases. Terrorists cause regional instability and civil unrest. This creates the conditions for war and increases the likelihood of any of their scenarios from happening. But third is severity. Absent OCOs, Middle Eastern and African nations will never get an opportunity to rebuild and develop, which locks in a cycle of instability and violence which kills millions, that always in the long term and on magnitude. But then on the top of their case, they say that Trump's new policy is bad. However, Borgard 19 finds that the 2018 cyber strategy reflects a shift to a posture that is more active, and analysis implies that the U.S. can engage its adversaries in cyberspace more assertively without provoking escalation dynamics, and the first application of the defending forward and persistent engagement concept was used to take Russian Internet Research Agency offline in the days preceding the 2018 midterm elections, and provides evidence that the U.S. can engage more directly in cyberspace without provoking escalatory spirals. What that means is that is terminal defense to the whole case, because what we've seen is that the U.S. has already used its policy in action now, and we have not seen any escalation, but it's also a direct dealing to their whole case, because it says that right now it postdates all of their evidence and says that the new policy means that all of their evidence is outdated and it doesn't apply anymore. But then on ending cooperation specifically, voting pro increases direct cooperation for 2 reasons. First is that if countries fear that they can get stopped by the U.S. in cyberspace, then they have an incentive to negotiate with the U.S. on certain issues. But second is the U.S. use of OCOs comforts other countries, as Barnes explains that the U.S. gives other countries OCOs, preventing them from adopting their own and alienating themselves from the U.S. But second, the only way for there to be cooperation is when there is a leader in cyberspace. If the U.S. takes that role, there's the ability to come out with a consensus on issues. But third, the New York Times finds that 27 countries signed an agreement about rules and regulations within cyberspace. There are 2 implications here. First is that all of their arguments about cooperation are already being solved for in the status quo. But second, it increases the chance of further alliances because of the vast scale and importance of further which further turns their argument. But fourth, additionally, even if they prove to you that 1 to 2 countries don't like what the U.S. is doing, the majority of them have already agreed to come to the table, which means the AF increases alliances with more countries. That's a net benefit. But finally, as an independent advantage, Tucker explains that NATO is going to switch to cyberspace but will be fully reliant on U.S. offensive cyber operations. Critically, Martin explains that the U.S. use of OCOs sends a signal to allies, which ramping up both A, NATO's perceived deterrence, and B, cooperation. That's a net benefit overall. But then on reverse engineering. First, it's a reason to vote for us because reverse engineering allows the US to build up their own defenses because they can patch up holes in their system and gain experience. Moreover, Gorman notes that the US employs white hat hackers to reverse engineer US capabilities to protect things like critical infrastructure. That means that one, the US deterrence gets stronger in the long term, and because its cyber systems appear stronger, but two, even if people want to retaliate, the US can protect itself, which significantly mitigates the impact of the attack. But further, countries cannot just turn and attack us or others with our own weapons, as Borgard 19 furthers that OCOs lack universal effectiveness. Conventional munitions can be used to target other conventional infrastructure, but cyber weapons must be tailored to a specific target. Malware that brings one system down may have absolutely no effect on another. Then he gives the example of WannaCry, which had no effect on already up-to-date computer systems. But second, cyberspace expands beyond just the US. Indeed, Lake of Bloomberg finds that Russia, China, and Iran all reverse engineer each other's OCOs, which means that even absent the US using OCOs, other countries are always going to be able to reverse engineer offensive cyber operations. That's a terminal, non-unique on their case. But on the impact level on banking, the OECD finds that any major attack would be incredibly short-term because A, the longer an attack lasts, the easier it is to detect and reverse it, but B, large-scale attacks are very easy to trace and reverse, which means that the impact would be short-term. But second, Levicki of the RAND Corporation finds that even if a cyber attack stopped the banking system completely, it would not have a long-term effect. But then on developing nations, the evidence is really bad and it's outdated. It's from 2011. Both of their warrants say that their impacts have already occurred, and yet we have not seen the developing world's internet being stopped. That's a length number. Their impact doesn't happen. It won't.
Also, quick, speed was like, that was good. You can go faster than that if you need to.
Okay.
And Barnes and the whole advantage.
Say what?
Barnes, the second response, was like, you said decreasing cooperation, return was the second one, Barnes. And then the whole advantage was Martin and another card.
Yeah.
It's probably a new file card. Error 405. Alright, we're just gonna go get you like a bottle of Tylenol and you should carry that around. Hey Brandon, are you all running prep by chance?
Yeah, we're running prep.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what
we're just waiting.
it's
Yeah,
at
yeah.
25 right
Yeah.
now. I'm going to stop it at 30. Yeah.
Oh my god. Which Barnes card is it?
It's like Barnes or the Wall Street. It says America's Ally.
Let me see it. Which command if alienating?
You do that. I'm gonna find NATO.
Okay.
Okay. And my Wi-Fi cut out. Can you see?
We have like 4 different block lists.
Spread out over everyone. Computer's going really slow.
Does it have any charge?
I have it. Alright, I've got NATO.
Oh, is your laptop 10?
This is NATO.
Okay. Need it.
either of you read two alliances carded or just analytic that most countries already agree? Do you remember?
That's from the New York Times.
Is it independent from the third response?
What's the third?
The third one's your like countries are creating consensus now. The fourth one is saying what like countries agree with the U.S. Is that the distinction?
It's like.
Or do you have a speech shock?
Yeah.
All right.
I'll show you a few things.
Call that 40 seconds total. It was 40 seconds total.
It says second response is that the US is taking the role.
I caught that. Yeah.
And then New York Times says that countries are already agreeing.
With less.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then like the fourth response is a part of the third response. Like the majority agree. That's part of the third response. It's just like it's more implications.
One big response.
Yeah. You getting it?
No, I can't find it. Yeah, just kick the Barnes response. We can't find it.
Which one?
Barnes? The second response.
Barnes.
Kick Barnes. Yeah, I can't find the card.
That's fine.
Alright, that's fine.
Give me your speech shot. The advantage by 0 cents. No, even just like the way that you duplicate it.
That was too flat is what I thought. But I might be wrong. Cool.
How much do you have left, or you
So
just
one flat, one left.
one left? Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to start off on the way that they did, responding to that, then responding to the attacks they made, and then attacking their case. Cool. Is anyone not ready? Okay. Starting on their weighing. None of their weighing is actually comparative, it's just talking about how great their side is. First on probability, realize we're talking about our first subpoint literally tells you right now we're not seeing alliances in this scope. I argue that's 100% probability too. Then on scope, they talk about Middle East and Africa. Our impacts, the first one is, or one of them is global and one of them is impacting all developing countries. I argue that's just as large, if not a larger scope. Then on severity, like that's an issue for later, but we contend that like pushing millions of people into poverty is a pretty bad thing. But then on frontline, first start off on frontline, on our first contention, they first try to tell you that like U.S. is shifting to a more active role. However, that's exactly what we're saying. Because they're doing that, allies are less likely to trust us because we're invading their sovereign cyberspace. That's what happened with Germany. To give you the one example about the midterm elections, however, the Washington Post explains on February of 2018 that what happened with the Washington Post attack, that it was literally, that Pentagon officials literally called the attack just a pinprick, not a deterrence. It didn't actually discourage Russia from doing anything in the long term. It's not actually meaningful in any way. All we're doing is just annoying our enemies. But then on the rest of the response, they first try to tell you that countries are going to negotiate with the United States. That's literally not what's happening right now. Countries are just choosing not to work with the United States. Look to Germany as an example. The second response, they can't find the card. They told you to kick it, so just kick it. Then on the third response, they try to tell you that like 27 countries are working together. That's important though, because the United States is not working with these countries. And even if they sign a piece of paper together, it doesn't matter because we're looking at actual trust. It doesn't matter if they're part of like a rhetorical alliance. If they're not willing to work with each other, then it doesn't matter. Then on the fourth response, they say a majority of them are coming to the table. The experience evidence literally says that the U.S. U.S. alienating its allies, that process is only going to increase in the future, meaning our impact happens in the long term. On their advantage about NATO deterrence or whatever, you can turn it because Lewis explains in 2018 that because the U.S. is so secretive about its OCOs with NATO, it doesn't actually like give them anything. It just run it all on their own. What actually happens is you see miscalculation because countries don't know the threat of the United States, which means you're only going to be increasing the chance of war if the United States continues to oversee or its OCOs. But then on the second contention, they first try to turn it. That the Gordon response is just entirely non-responsive. We're talking about attacks that the United States does on other countries, not attacks that arrive in the United States. But then on the second response, they try to tell you that the effectiveness isn't like everywhere, but I contend that a majority of malware affects like global systems, things like AWS or things like AWS or like Microsoft systems. Even if they can give you one example of something being patched, I'd argue other things like Eternal Blue are still an issue today. But then they try to tell you that other countries are a problem, but like Russia and Iran. But however, the United States has the greatest like level of cyber attacks, and we've seen the greatest harm come from them. And furthermore, impact is together. And then finally, on all their impact defense, they all say it's short term. It doesn't matter if it's short term or long term. We say the harms are going to happen, which like because of like fear and consumer speculation. Even if it happens over a short period of time, it's still going to cause a lasting impact. On their case, on their first warrant about drones, you realize the only evidence they have here about the actual quantification is the 85%. But if you actually look at the evidence, it's actually talking about like a research prototype that hasn't even been deployed, so it's not even relevant. Furthermore, it's talking about like a drone that can attack like a Wi-Fi signal. It's not an OCO at all. But then second, you can turn it because Bourdon explains that these kind of drones they're talking about, because they're autonomous, they follow with unclear logic to many countries, and because of that they just escalate tensions, which increases the chance of war. But then on the second link about funding, the DOS and TIE both explain that the United States is placing sanctions on like on ISIS members, which means you don't need like these kind of attacks. And then second, the UNSC explains that ISIS holds a lot of money in cash. OCOs don't do anything against that. But then on the third link about recruitment, you can turn this because Berger actually explains that whenever you see the attacking social media accounts, ISIS attacking social media accounts, ISIS actually just revives the social media accounts, creates new ones, and actually double down on the effort. And they conclude that recruitment actually goes up when you take down social media accounts because they want to do this even more. But then second, you can turn it because when you take down social media accounts, ISIS then you lose access to intel because the number of ISIS accounts and tweets and stuff are being geotagged, meaning you can find out locations of like intel sources. So you're losing intel once you take away these social media accounts. But then on the fourth response, you can literally look to the Bloomberg and the CSIS that explain that the United Kingdom and Australia are both doing these kind of cyber attacks. It doesn't actually matter. But then on their second warrant, their only impact about like their only analysis about Boko Haram being a threat right now comes from 2012. That's a 60% card. Look to Chalen from 2019 explains that Boko Haram can't actually do advanced cyber attacks because they lack infrastructure capability, they lack revenue, and also their own evidence tells you it's not just the United States training, it's Western countries, all Western countries as well. And finally, it's not even topical. Training isn't an offensive cyber operation.
Can I see that U.S. cyber attacks are the best in the world? Like,
Yeah.
the response to Lake.
Can I see like drones increase tensions, which causes war?
Sorry, what?
The turn, the unfair to the turn.
On
that you
sharpshooting, you say drones increase tensions.
Oh, yeah, yeah, logic, something. Here's the second one. Or sorry, here's Gordon.
Okay.
From like 2 days ago, I think.
Yeah. Okay, you good for cross?
Do you want the powerful one? The U.S.'s strong cyber attacks?
Yeah.
Y'all are keeping track of your own prep, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the one in the front sentence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Alright.
Go
So let's talk about your impact on financial institutions, right?
Yeah.
So you say that like already cyber operations are costing $1 trillion annually, right?
Yes.
Okay. So why hasn't like a recession happened every year because of that?
So we're telling you the threat of in the financial sector is at a relatively small scale right now because not too many organizations have the capability to completely collapse the grid. However, with time, as countries and actors develop capabilities or gain those capabilities from like our own cyber attacks, which is our reverse engineering warrant, then the problem only gets worse.
So how much money has to be lost from the global economy to cause that?
How much money has to be lost?
Yeah, like $1 trillion is a lot
question
of
of how much
money.
money has to be lost and or compared to where the attack happened. There's a specific
Okay.
type of like banking infrastructure called like R9 or something like that, which manages how different stock exchanges interact, like how the NYSE
Okay.
interacts with like the London Stock
So,
Exchange.
like-
Attacking those kinds of things, even if it's only disabled for a day or a week or whatever, is going to collapse the financial grid.
Okay, so I guess what I want to know is like, what is the actual scenario of like a recession happening?
What is the actual scenario?
Yeah,
What do you
like
mean?
your internal link that you read in Case is that it costs a lot of money each year, which could cause a cascading economic catastrophe, right? So you would assume that costing $1 trillion each year would have already caused the cascading economic catastrophe.
Well,
but
no,
it hasn't.
because the area that cybercrime happens right now, the 1 trillion that we're talking about, is a large set of small-scale attacks. However, we're telling you that problem is only going to get worse in the future. That's why like the 1 trillion figure increases over time. But more importantly, our impact is twofold. Like we have the financial systems collapse, but we're also telling you just general cybercrime is a problem because it hurts developing countries. Like,
Okay.
that's the other part of it.
You're good.
Okay, cool. So on your second warrant, the one about like Africa and Boko Haram, right?
Yeah.
So the 60% card, like the whole like increase in cyber
Yeah.
attacks, that was from 2012, right?
That's from 2019.
Like the 60% part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll call for it after. But sure.
Okay, yeah, it's from 2019.
Yeah.
It says that like cyber attacks are ramping up right now, like up to 60%, and it's going to cause like cascading failures.
Okay, cool. I'll just call for it in a second.
Let's talk about terrorism again. So
Fine.
on our recruitment warrant, you make the response that like cutting off like social media channels creates more recruitment efforts.
Yes.
Is that correct? How does that exactly happen?
So the version analysis is just like it's an empirical study done based, or not empirical, not, but based on when the United States and other parties have disabled or taken down social media accounts on ISIS. What they've discovered is whenever that happens, new new accounts are created, and they actually double down on effort, spending more time and energy like spreading these and increasing the size of these accounts. And in turn, you see the recruitment rate and the rate of radicalization both increase.
All right, so you can have a question.
For sure. So then on your drone stuff, the actual like solvency for this, the 85%
Yeah.
part, is that actually talking about an OCO?
Sure. Ackerman is like just like a numerical value for the Solmeyer evidence, which says that using offensive cyber
But
operations
is
in
the
tandem,
prototype
in
explained in Ackerman
tandem,
offensive cyber operations?
so I'm getting into that.
Okay.
Solmeyer says using OCOs in tandem with drones makes them cause less civilian casualties.
Okay.
All right. Can I see the like the recruitment responses that I asked about?
Yeah.
So,
Wait. The recruitment responses?
Yeah, yeah.
The Berger. Yeah, sure,
yeah,
sure. Did you ask for that before cross? Or
No,
okay.
I asked about that in cross.
Okay,
So-
sorry. I thought I forgot something. I was
Yeah,
like,
you're good.
Okay. Okay. So the first turn about geotagging and stuff is the first paragraph. And the other turn is a bit longer. I'm sorry, I literally tried to be as concise as possible, but it's still kind of long.
Okay. And then, so this is the second.
Yeah, so it's just, it's like this is the actual data. This is more of a warrant explanation behind it.
also see the card in your case that says that like no countries are working with the U.S. anymore?
Oh yeah. Sorry, you were just asking like the other country don't want to work with us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not that like tensions are high or anything, but just like they're just not working with us.
Oh, okay. 1 second.
Okay.
We I don't think we ever read a
don't, like,
card like
explicit-
that. We don't like read a card that says
We
that.
read that like our
Right.
adversaries are losing
We
trust.
say that
and
they're
confidence in
less
us.
they become less likely to work with us
Okay,
on like
that's
intelligence
fine.
sharing mechanisms.
Okay.
If that's
and
a
like
card you want.
confidence and stuff. Like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Is that
Okay.
correct?
I
Alright.
just run a little bit of prep quick.
Alright, cool. Did you take prep for the Berger card?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 30 seconds of prep left. The order is basically going to be starting on the overview, down the app, down the neg. Okay, is everyone good? All right. Start on the weighing overview. They undercover scope and severity. First on scope, they just say they link in because like they cause wars too. But realize we're telling you pull in actors long term. They say like we say they decrease long term stability. That's really bad because that gets back to co-op. I'll get back to that on the advantage. But on severity weighing, they say they're going to get back to it later in the case. They really don't. But also in Middle East and Africa, it's not that you're putting people into poverty and that it weighs the same. But rather what we're saying is that you never have good developmental policies because terrorism is always going to force them to look externally to fighting these people. It keeps the people stuck in poverty. Not that they go into poverty in the first place. You're always going to be weighing us before. On the turn on drones. First, they're dealing that saying like this is a research purpose and like it's not like being actually used would mean that their turn on drones is rather just talking about traditional drones if it's happening right now. That means it's non-unique because the Rudisill evidence at the top of the case tells you that drones are being utilized right now even without OCOs, which means it functionally takes that out. But even if that was true, the card talks specifically about interstate conflict, not fighting terrorists. We can see the funding on recruitment. They read two turns. First, they read that like they make new accounts and they go up, but the Bates evidence specifically tells you that even if that's true, long term they're always going to be decreasing. And that's Rogers evidence that tells you 98% of their terrorist land was lost. So even if in the small instances they were able to come back, like it doesn't really matter in the long term. As long as we're fighting the now, we show that they're dead. The second turn is that like we lose like intel and like a geolocation, but the Lamoth evidence is really key that tells you like without using OCOs, we would have never been able to do this in the first place. That's why they've been like decimated right now. At that point, also their evidence is like super propaganda specific. It's not about increasing a following. Then on the fourth thing, they just read the UK is doing it now, but they give you no comparison to the United States. We give you two different instances where they're completely detonated. The US is the most effective. That's the Barber and Rogers evidence that tells you in the 2017 attack, we decreased their conventional capabilities, pushing them into ISIS territory and into other people's allied territory so they're allowed to fight them. The Lamoth evidence is really key though because it tells you if you take out OCOs, you reverse all the progress that we have made thus so far. So by taking them out, you essentially let terrorists run rampant and decrease regional instability, which is another link back into our overview. The Dudley evidence is also key because it tells you in 1 year alone, 20,000 terrorists or 20,000 people
died and 500,000 people were killed. The Hubbard evidence is also key because it's another piece of offense that tells you that because conventional troops have already been pulled out, OCOs are the only way that we can fight them. Let's go to the top of their case. The Bogart evidence basically. They say that allies are less willing to work with us because we have this bad posturing, but the Bogart evidence tells you that it's proof of concept that we've already used it. They say it was only a pinprick. No, we shut down an entire major corporation, and Russia didn't even tweet about it. They literally did nothing. They don't show you a bright line until when we're going to see something happen. Then on the New York Times evidence, all they say is that these people they're not working with the U.S. But I call for the evidence. A, it doesn't exist, but B, they say it's just some analytic that says tensions are high right now. But the NYT evidence specifically tells you despite tensions being high, still they signed a treaty and decided to work with each other. But even if you don't believe that, the Tucker advantage goes really undercovered. It tells you that the U.S. is the one who provides OCOs to all these countries. That has two implications. The first implication is that if they pull out, that's going to increase regional instability because they have no OCOs to protect each other, which means you go with the AF's interpretation that they're going to switch to conventional conflict. But the Markin evidence also tells you that it increases cooperation because NATO is the one building it. They can't go to conflict because of being secretive because they're building the program themselves. Then the lake turn at the bottom tells you that reverse engineering is completely non-unique because Russia and China still built them outside of the U.S., meaning if the intent is still there, they'll still have the capability and they'll still attack the developing world. At that point, we're winning.
See the evidence that says without OCOs, all our progress would have been reversed.
Yeah.
That's Hubbard.
Yeah. It's 2 cards.
Oh, okay. Cool. We'll just start back and see it. No worries.
So, Hubbard is the contextualization. It says, which one do you help with? So, I'll mention anti-axis, and I'll show you the contextualization for OCOs.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so then, that's where still. And then Hubbard's we just pull out 5 troops. So this is
Wait, what? Sorry. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna run some crap. That was 8 seconds probably.
Alright.
Very quickly, can I see the Tucker evidence?
This Tucker?
Is it? That's Tucker, not Tucker.
It's the advantage.
Yeah.
Can you just email me the whole advantage side?
It's just 2 cards.
It's
Okay.
Tucker. Can you just email me the whole thing?
Otherwise,
Just because we
okay, it's fine. Just can you pull up screenshots?
Yeah.
I'll put it in the docs.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah. That's
I kind of want to get this wrapped up. Yeah, I'm fine.
good.
Yeah, we're good.
You sure?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, the order is going to be the weighing that they read. Then down their ISIS argument, then addressing the independent stuff they read on alliances, and then going down to our subpoint B, and then the impacts weighing.
Wait, so.
I'll just signpost.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine.
I'll try to cover a lot of stuff, so it's too much, just tell me.
Okay.
Or, no, am I going too fast?
Okay.
I'm tired. I know what I mean. Alright. 5 more seconds, actually.
Yeah. How much is too much?
Alright, I'm good. Starting on the framing debate, they don't do a good job of responding to what Nihar's already addressed on these arguments. They only go for two. The first is scope, but they only impacted 50,000 lives in the Middle East, while we impacted financial attacks that go all over the world, and global cyber attacks will also increase instability. Then they say instability is cyclical, but A, we'd argue the poverty around the world leads to instability because when people don't have money, that's what causes conflict. But second, the New York Times tells you the poverty is cyclical because it's too hard to escape poverty because you can't afford an education and healthcare, so people are trapped for generations. Then go down to the app. They go for two warrants, a third and a fourth. On their third warrant, they try to Nihar reads a burger term that says that when you try to shut down ICE accounts, they just double down and increase recruitment. They say in the long term, you still saw decreases in ISIS capability. Realize that if they lose the link here, all it means is the conventional operations were able to take down ISIS in spite of the damage that OCOs were doing to this. Then they say there are arguments about propaganda, not recruitment, but realize the whole point behind propaganda is to recruit new fighters. Then the second term that Nihar reads that they don't respond to properly is that you lose intelligence through geotagging, which tells you where the ISIS fighters are because all their propaganda material has their locations tied to it. This means that we're able to use, once we take these things down with OCOs, we're no longer able to collect this intelligence. It is a trade-off. This responds to their following down as well. Then on the Bloomberg, they don't respond to the Bloomberg analysis well either. It says Australia and UK can solve. All they say is that the Rogers evidence says that the US is the most effective. Like 2 sentences down in the Rogers evidence, it says that it was heavily dependent on the alliance, the US-like coalition alliance. This means that Australia and the UK have done all. Empirically, we've seen them we can give examples of where they beat back fighters. But second, we'd argue that even if they haven't done it in the past, they still have the capability to do the exact same things. That means that the US backs out, they can fill in. It doesn't no matter what they've done in the past. Then go into our first contention, extend the terminal defense that they read against subpoint A and alliances kicks out of everything. But second, and more importantly, extend the Lewis term that they don't respond to. This is that U.S. OCOs are really secretive, which increases mistrust and distrust within NATO because they don't know what we're doing, especially since we're invading their territorial sovereignty. This responds to the independent NATO DABs, it's clearly making the problem worse. Empirics prove. Then go on our second contention, using OCOs causing uncontrollable spread of computer viruses. As Hitchens explains, the cyber weapons are guaranteed to be reverse engineered and copied because all you have to do is to see the attack to find the codes. Copycats are inevitable. This causes unintended cyber proliferation. That's why China used their viruses successfully this year to launch cyber attacks against the Philippines. They respond to this by saying that other countries already have cyber weapons, but the US has a history of the most devastating cyber weapons like WannaCry and APT-3. That's the political evidence that Nihar reads in rebuttal. We are the most powerful. Then they ask, why isn't this happening? The more OCOs we launch, the more powerful our opponent's cyber weapons get. The more likelihood that they're able to take down these interbank exchanges and collapse the financial system. It is a fallacy to say that something will never happen just because it hasn't happened yet. Specifically, Bloom 11 tells you that when you see all of these catastrophic attacks, you create volatility in the financial market. You can have a sudden event in the short term causing market collapse. That's what happened in 2008 when Bear Stearns went underwater. A single event is enough to trigger a chain reaction that leads to this collapse. So we outweigh on magnitude. 900 million people go into a recession when you have people go into poverty when you have a recession. This goes global instead of just affecting Africa, and this also turns my opponent's grid impact because our enemies get stronger when they get more powerful weapons, which increases conflict. ISIS will be able to get stronger when they can use their weapons. This also comes before all their other weighing arguments.
Okay.
Too faster.
No, I was done.
Alright.
You could have gone faster if you wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so quick clarification. So at the end of your speech, you say it's a logical fallacy to assume something won't happen when it hasn't happened in the past. Isn't that just probability?
No, because we tell you the probability is increasing right now.
Like,
sure,
the
but
way
like
you structured
how
your
much?
impact defense on our case was basically like, because it's never happened, you should have looked at it because it's not.
No.
Our impact defense on your case is that your links have triggered already, but your impacts have not occurred.
No, it hasn't. Right?
Yeah, but we're saying our links have not triggered to the extent that we're talking about.
What's
Why
the
not?
extent that
So
you're
what
talking
is-
about?
Again,
Right. As the United States increases its own cyber research and the strength of its offensive
It
cyber
did.
operations,
So we're just going in a
the threat to the
circle
United
here.
States increases.
We're just
Okay,
going in
but
the
it did in
circle. Because
2018 and nothing happened.
Yeah, the
Like-
first piece of evidence that you read in case
Derek,
specifically
right.
says what you just said,
No,
right? It
wait.
says that the U.S. increased its
Right.
offensive cyber operations.
Wait, that's not what we're talking about at all. Because
What?
We're telling, one second. Because what we're trying to tell you is United States, as the United States increases the strength of its offensive cyber operations in order to create more catastrophic events, that only worsens the problem because it means that our adversaries can gain access to this and cause back on us.
So
That
well,
is
no,
definitionally-
Dude, that's your unique.
That is definitionally what you're using
Alright,
this.
here, let me answer this.
That's what we're
Alright,
saying. That's what we're
here's the
saying.
thing, right? The specific analysis that gets extended through case rebuttal and summary is that you need an attack on what's known as the interbank exchange, which is the system that connects financial markets together. That's what causes a chain reaction.
Does anyone-
We haven't seen those specific devastating attacks yet. Otherwise, we see the CMA global recession.
Alright,
but
so
the more powerful your cyber weapons get, the more likelihood that they're able to penetrate these interbank exchanges. That's what takes down the market.
Yeah.
Alright, you want a question?
Yeah, sure. So on the propaganda stuff,
Yeah.
you said something about how propaganda isn't recruitment. Could you
Sure.
explain that?
So just because you have a, like, so think of it like this. Just because you run a lot of commercials doesn't mean anyone's going to buy your product, right? The Rogers and Lamoth evidence are really clear and say that, like, sure, like, maybe they have a lot of propaganda, but at the end of the day, they were decimated. They lost 98% of their land, but I know what you're going to say, like, sure,
Okay,
like,
yeah,
the alliances.
your own third warrant has the word media platforms.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
my
sure,
question
like
is- my
social
question
media.
Is your third warrant reliant on, like, online
So
media
I don't go,
platforms?
okay,
Isn't
so,
that your
it's
own-
like,
so
it's
clar-
like,
okay,
it-
clarification, I don't go for my third warrant, I just frontline the turn.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, but I'm just
It's
asking,
talking
is that
about
a
it's
recruitment
talking about like online platforms, i.e., like forums, like social media. Yes,
Okay.
like anything online.
Like just
Whatever.
communication.
Wait, isn't
Yeah.
that your own third warrant?
That is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
that's
what
right.
it
I
is.
just wanted to
Yeah.
confirm that, yeah, because you had some response that was like propaganda isn't a recruitment, and I was very
No, so what the response was that, like, propaganda, just because you run propaganda doesn't automatically mean you get
Yeah.
more recruitment.
Didn't you
have
say
to
that
sell-
ISIS recruits 82% of people through online platforms?
They used to recruit
Yeah,
82%
but,
before cyber
Like you can
attacks.
recruit like without
So
using.
isn't that just a reason to vote for
Okay,
us?
that's
No, no.
fine. We can
Alright, whatever.
That's
That was-
a dumb question.
Okay, I don't know how much prep we. Oh, that's
We have
10
like
seconds.
If you don't want to do it, I think we just prep for 10 seconds.
Yeah, just prep for 10
Alright.
seconds. I'm just gonna run prep. 30 seconds.
So what do they say?
They would just extend the, like, US association. These are operations because they the issue that they yeah, yeah. They want to.
Okay. Yeah. So it's going to be our case on the Wang, then like down our case, and then on their case.
Well, can you just repeat that?
Yeah.
So Wang, our case, their case.
Alright, sounds good. Are we ever responding to our wing?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Whatever. Go for it.
Sure. Is it just like what you responded on
No,
the top?
it's okay.
Okay.
On the scope link, they really mishandle it. All they say is that like we only affect 20,000 people, and like theirs is 900 million. The problem is that our scope link specifically says that terrorism pulls in other actors, which causes long-term instability in the region, which affects millions of people over time, which outweighs on the long term and on scope. But then on severity, because you see that we like independently delay the development of these countries, which also affects millions of people in the long term. That's why we're always outweighing, because what you see is that all of their impacts happen in the short term, but ours are recurring and intergenerational. But on our case, you extend Hubbard and Carlile, which tells you that right now, because the U.S. has pulled out troops out of the Middle East, the only thing that is fighting terrorists is OCOs. And our Carlile evidence tells you that because of that, if we stop using OCOs, ISIS will come back larger than ever and more lethal than ever. On recruitment, they only make two responses. First is that we're using conventional methods to take down platforms, and that we actually lose intel, but our bait evidence is really clear in saying that we were able to decimate the recruitment platforms for over a year, and that's already happened. That means that there's a net benefit to affirming, because even if there was a slight bit of lost intel, we still decimated their platforms, which was a net benefit. That's why you always vote for us, but we're going for our fourth link, which is practically conceded. Our Vavra evidence tells you that, what does Vavra say? Vavra says that in 2017, we destroyed their cyber capabilities, and our Rogers evidence tells you that 98% of ISIS's territory was lost directly because of OCOs and would not have happened without it. Lamoth says that we need to continue to use OCOs in order to perpetually stop anti-terror, to stop terror, or else we won't be able to do it. That's why you extend Dudley, which tells you that that terrorists caused 20,000 deaths and 500,000 deaths due to instability. On their case, you extend Bogar, which tells you that the new policy has already been used, but nothing happened. If anything, it decreased the chance of escalation. That's a straight turn on their case. Also, the non-unique from New York Times, which says that 27 people signed the treaty, which means that we're solving already. You also extend Lake, which is a terminal non-unique that they really mishandled. That tells you that that other countries can always get OCOs from reverse engineering from other countries. And also, Bogard says that WannaCry, which was a reverse engineered US OCO, did not do anything, which means that US OCOs aren't better than other countries. Also extend our NATO response, which is that regional instability would happen if the US doesn't use OCOs because they just revert to conventional methods.
Use the last 10. a bit weird. So, first, starting off with weighing, where they, on the scope analysis, they try to tell you that we don't outweigh on scope. Like, their impact is restricted to like a couple areas of conflict. Ours is putting 900 million people into poverty. Just on a numerical basis alone, that's what we're going to be outweighing just on scope there. But then on severity, they try to tell you that their impact is more severe because it's cyclical. Brandon literally tells you in summary that poverty is also cyclical, and it also leads to instability. We link into their own warrants. But at the point where if you just like don't want to evaluate those two weighing mechanisms, look to the one that Brandon specifically told you, which is short circuit. Because insofar, or short circuiting, which happens through our own case, because which I'll explain in a second. But on their case, remember the major term from Berkeley that goes very poorly responded to, that explains once you take down ISIS accounts, then you just see more pop up, and they happen at a much higher level, which increase a much higher level with much more effort, which increases radicalization rates and increases recruitment rates. That's really important because then what they're doing is just increasing the rate of recruitment for ISIS. They try to tell you that it worked in the past. We're telling you that it was conventional weapons that worked in the past. It wasn't, and this just made the problem worse. They try to talk to you about how like we collapsed the social media platform. However, we're talking about the long term. In the short term, even if the social media decreased, in the long term we saw recruitment rates increase. But the Bloomberg response also was completely unresponded to in the final focus. Remember, the UK can also do everything that the United States does. They stop communications of ISIS for over a year. That's all back for everything they talk about. On our case, though, Hitchens, going for a subpoint B, Hitchens explains that Saudi weapons are guaranteed to be reverse engineered and copied. All they have to do is see the attack to find the code, which means copycats are inevitable. This causes unintended cyber proliferation. That's China used their viruses to successfully this year to launch cyber attack against the Philippines. The only response they actually gave was that other countries have them, but they dropped the political response that was read in rebuttal. They called for it in first summary. They still haven't responded. That tells you that the U.S. has the most devastating cyber attack. Therefore, the problem is much worse. The reason why the impact hasn't happened yet is because OCOs haven't gotten powerful enough. But we told you the break is happening now, and once OCOs get powerful enough, then we can see actual things that can harm the actual financial system, which is really problematic because once they reverse engineer financial attacks, then you see collapse the actual financial system, which pushes 900 million people into poverty. That happens with things like R9 attacks. Then finally, on the short circuit weighing mechanism, if we use our cyber attacks against ISIS, we're only making them stronger because they can reverse engineer our attacks. That's what Brandon read in summary that weighing has not been responded to. That means you're only making ISIS stronger. That's a couple of reasons to affirm.
Good round.